the reason Frasier works so well is because of the amazing characters. There can be no real narrative, and the characters can really carry the story. And this is exactly what we see with My Coffee with Niles. This is the 24th and final episode of the first season of Frasier, directed by the wonderful James Burrows. And that's not to say there isn't an overarching narrative or theme, because there is, but in terms of the narrative moving forward and clear narrative progression, it's not as structured as some previous episodes, because this one takes place entirely in Cafe Nervosa. Now, the reason it works quite well, when the characters aside, is because they have to keep moving around. Niles and Frasier get there and they can't get a seat. They go outside, it starts to rain, they go inside, and then some other characters come along here and there, and I'll talk about that in a moment. So there are things that move the narrative maybe not forward, but around about. So things do keep moving around a little bit, but it's mostly about them just discussing things and talking to each other. And this comes about because Niles asks Frasier, "Are you happy?" And Niles provides an answer when Frasier prompts an answer, but Frasier himself doesn't really know how to answer it quite as clearly. And they start to discuss this, and then different things trigger the conversation to go off in different directions. Roz comes along, she's having a date with somebody. Martin and Daphne and Eddie as well come along too, and obviously the conversation goes in different directions. And Frasier is still kind of not answering this question. Martin reveals something that actually broke my heart. I won't say what it is because I don't want to spoil things too much, but he reveals something, and it was actually really really emotional, and I didn't love that for Martin. Um, so that was definitely emotive, but ultimately it's about the characters, observing them and their mannerisms and their behaviors and their thoughts and feelings, but it also asks the viewer to answer that question as well, or to at least think about that question. Are you happy? With Niles, he gives a very clear cut answer. With Frasier, it's not as straightforward. And I think that viewers will have a similar response to one or the other. And I feel like I'm Team Frasier with this one. It's not as clear cut as yes, I'm happy, or no, I'm not happy. Whereas I think some people will be able to respond the way Niles did, and it's really thought provoking, definitely character driven, and I really adored it. The only thing I didn't like was the use of the term bumbershoot, which Daphne uses, and it's kind of given as a Britishism for an umbrella, but that's not true. I've never heard this term in my life, and then I googled it, and apparently it's an American informal term for for an umbrella. So that was a bit peculiar. I've never heard the term bumbershoot, and Google tells me it's actually an American term, so that kind of irritated me, but not so much that it affected my enjoyment of the episode. Not at all. It was different to not have anything at KCL, to not be in the apartment. But Cafe Nervosa is a brilliant setting. We we also get this poor barista, or this waitress, played by Harry, who just keeps coming to the table to give Fraser his order, and he keeps saying something's wrong with it. And this coffee is very much representative of his life and the way he's responding to things. And I thought that was such a lovely thing to include. And the waitress was brilliant. Her facial expressions were fabulous. It's a funny episode, but it's very thought provoking and very moving, and a great insight into the characters and their emotions and how they're feeling. And ultimately, I think it asks the viewer to look at the same question. And I really enjoyed it. It's a very different episode, and I think a pretty moving way to end the final season. Definitely an episode that I will always be happy to come back to. And I guess depending on my own situation, my own response to that question will also differ. Really enjoyed it. Definitely a very different, very cleverly done episode. In the wrong hands, this could have been boring. It could have been dull. But thankfully, we have the right cast, the right writers, the right director. This episode is written by David Angell and Peter Casey, so it's got everybody on board. And thankfully, My Coffee with Niles worked really, really well.